and to provide factual and policy information wherever we can. Perhaps we can put up the protocols. We've developed a couple simple meeting protocols, which are very standard in these kinds of meetings, to ensure that everyone has an equal chance to participate and that all views can be heard respectfully. I'll do just a quick look at these. You can see them up on the screen. And please use these as a guide when you're doing your call-in. Now, the people who wrote in earlier, some of which several days ago, did not have access to these, and so some of the emails may be a little different. We're here to learn and understand. As I said, that's our purpose. We want to respect our differences, treat our differences of opinion as a strength, not a weakness. All points of view are welcome. No personal attacks. This is about issues. Each speaker should try to be concise. We'll try to hold everyone to 3 minutes. And please try not to repeat. Simply add your agreement and amplify as desired. Town staff and leadership are here to listen in an atmosphere of mutual respect. Town staff and leadership will answer specific questions and provide specific information, particularly the panel that we've had assembled. Because this is virtual, we were not able to hear everyone, commentators firsthand, see your face and hear your voice. Our team will be reading some of the comments received in writing, and we'll do our best to get the gist of that, but bear with us these days with virtual COVID meetings. It can be challenging. And there will be follow-up. This is only the beginning. Okay, we'll take the, yeah, thanks. As I said, our panel includes Mayor Pallavi, who will respond to general questions of town philosophy and direction where appropriate. Andy Morris, our attorney, who will respond to questions that are legal in nature about governance. Bonnie Thomas Harden, who will respond to questions specifically around human resource policies, practices, diversity, inclusion, training, et cetera. And Police Chief Leftwich, who will respond to questions of police training, police philosophy, strategies, tactics around all of these issues. As I said, I'll be the moderator. I'll do my best to try to take the comments and direct them to a panelist if that's appropriate, or simply move on to the next commenter. We'll try not to duplicate. We'll try to capture some of the nuances, but we won't be able to in this complex and multifaceted conversation. But also realize the purpose of tonight is not to try to find consensus, and we're not trying to make solutions. It's way too early for that. It is the beginning of a conversation, not the end. I will try to keep us moving so everyone has an equal chance to participate, but our goal is to finish around 7. We'll go a little later if we have to, and if we have to do subsequent dialogue, we will do so. This is an important moment. And finally, before Mr. Pallavi, or Mayor Pallavi says his opening statement, I just want to say that we've literally received dozens and dozens of emails, and they're fairly complex, and some of them are fairly lengthy. We will be able to summarize those, but obviously not fully capture all those points in the time we have. We'll do our best to get the details, but we will miss some of them. But everything was being recorded, every comment in its entirety for all of you, those who wrote comments will be seen by town leadership. Many have already been seen, and will be seen by town decision makers. So with that, I'd like Mayor Pallavi to begin with his opening statements. Thanks, Mayor.
Thanks, Jeff. Good evening, everyone. Hope you can hear me clearly. Maybe. You want to cut it?
I think you should take a timeout.
Okay.
Lost the signal.
Okay.
Rory's working on it.
Yep.
Sorry.
That's okay. You want to text with my wife? She'll help you. She was
She was troubleshooting from home. Yeah, I was boarding him to Braun.
We're going to take a 5-minute break.
Her directly.
And so after you do the summaries, and, yes. And then after that, it's the pink notes.
No, or these initial 3 packets. These are for me. But I will hand these down to
I think
me.
it's
Sorry about that.
coming
Oh,
back.
you're taking over tech support.
So Dave, you just dive in and just say, oops.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you be the oops guy. Yep. Or they just watch on TV. Or they stream it. And they either do the link or they just actually can turn the TV on.
It's on channel 18. Setting.
Yeah. Remind me tomorrow. Yeah, no, that's right. Is it coming back or where are we? Cameras are working again. Cameras are on, ladies and gentlemen. There we go.
Just tell me when.
We should be back.
Okay.
It'll go to a black screen and then we'll be back.
And then you just want me to start? Okay. You guys are doing. There you go. Okay.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, everybody. We appreciate your patience while we worked out a few technical difficulties there. If you're just joining us now, our town manager, Jeff Lux, provided some introductions along with some ground rules and an agenda, and I'm going to start us off. So, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and again, I apologize for the slight delay in getting started tonight. I am David Polivy, your mayor of our town of Truckee. As mayor, I'm here to represent you and help progress the ideas, visions, expectations, and goals to make Truckee the best it can be. We are here to listen to your concerns, understand them, address specific questions where we can, and begin a dialogue to address the concerns and seek solutions. Sadness, grief, anger, frustration, confusion, fear, and resolve. These are just some of the emotions we each are feeling, whatever our beliefs, watching the tragic and senseless actions that occurred in Minneapolis several weeks ago, and the protests and violence that has gripped parts of our country since. We are not here to escalate or to defend. We are here to listen, learn, and understand all sides of this complicated issue, and to begin a productive and positive dialogue about the future. Last Tuesday, hundreds of Truckee citizens came together in support of racial and economic equality, justice for all, and in opposition to unwarranted police tactics. We showed what a peaceful yet forceful demonstration can be. Our town police department, led by Chief Leftwich, did an exemplary job at the event and showed how to protect people's right to protest safely and appropriately. That said, we cannot and we will not ignore the words Chief Leftwich wrote. As many of you know, the chief sent an email earlier in the day to all town staff. The primary intent of his email was to help educate and prepare staff, especially those who were concerned about how demonstrations and protests play out, and how the department helps handle such events. Unfortunately, the chief's email went way beyond the intent and strayed into views about the national debate and the situation in Minneapolis and elsewhere. From my perspective, this was unacceptable and inappropriate. The final two paragraphs were insensitive and not reflective of the town's policies or values. The full council has not had a chance to meet about this, but each council member will have the opportunity to be heard in future meetings. Needless to say, the chief's words struck a highly negative chord with some staff and many Truckee residents. Our town manager sent a follow-up communication to the staff expressing similar views to mine the next morning, and has taken the necessary steps to discuss this with the chief and deal with the matter as a personnel matter. It's time to move forward as a community. We cannot change the past, and a paragraph or two in an email does not negate or diminish the stellar career of our chief, who has served us exceedingly well for 6 years and is, in fact, a champion of the type of community-based policing we espouse. But there is so much to learn, and that is what tonight is all about. This is a time to heal. This is a time to communicate openly and honestly. This is a time for our best compassion and understanding of all views of our Truckee family, no matter if we agree or not. This is a time to unite and build bridges, not divide. And tonight, we are here to open that dialogue. So much of the work we do here at Town Hall relates to the social and economic equity we strive to facilitate in this community. It's why I ran and why I'm here. Housing, sustainability, transit, public safety, trails, sidewalks, and public works are efforts that we undertake daily to create equitable opportunities for everybody in Truckee. Our emerging general plan and the opportunities to engage further emphasizes these opportunities. Service is at the core of our mission, and this is no different. But clearly, we have much to learn and reflect on. I believe in our work here and all of our abilities to make positive change. I believe in a just and fair society for all people of color. I believe that by listening to each other, we can all learn something and progress together. Thank you for your participation this evening, and for your braveness to tackle the challenges before us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to then now turn it over to Chief Rob Leftwich for a brief statement.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Mayor. The words we use are always significant. It is without debate that my words have angered some of our community and some of our town staff. Although my intentions have always been for good and for this community, I want nothing more than a healthy dialogue between community members and our town. My words have distracted us from that and the process of being productive and efficient as we move forward. I'm humbly apologetic for the words I wrote and for creating this unintended diversion. Although my intent in the email was to prepare and educate our staff who had safety concerns for arriving at work on Monday morning, my comments strayed into a national political debate. I should not have allowed my comments to do that. They should not have addressed national politics, and I will ensure that doesn't happen again. The chief of police or that email from last Monday should not be the conversation moving forward. This should be about racial and economic equalities in Truckee and how we continue to enhance our great community. I want nothing more than that, and I wish we could do that together. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chief. Appreciate those reflections. So now we're going to turn to the primary part of the evening, and that is to, we may have lost the, sorry, we can't tell if we're on or not. It appears we may have lost the signal again, but if we haven't, and if you're hearing me, again, I apologize if there are some technical difficulties.
We're gonna pause. Sorry.
Okay, I'm so sorry. What is down is the connectivity from here to channel 18. The stream is continuing. So you have the option of seeing if Rory can get that back, channel 18, or continuing on the stream. He said 5 minutes into this broadcast, he reported 106 people on the stream.
So
So they can hear.
Let's keep doing the stream. Can you or Ron, can you get something out? I know it's not gonna be hard to reach anybody. Just put something out and say if you're on channel 18, please go to the stream. Go to the stream. Okay, let's do that. Let's continue. So should I go back to talking? All right. This is Jeff Lux again.
Oh, so
Yeah, fair thing.
Turn your mics off. You should make. Still watching.
okay. Hi, everybody. So I know you can still hear us. We're getting some mixed signals here. Please bear with us. We are understanding that channel 18 is down. The live stream is still up. And we are just going to give us 30 seconds to regroup, and we'll be right back with you on the stream only. So we will be streaming only in 2 minutes. 2 minutes, and we'll be streaming only. Sorry. Thank you for your patience, and we promise we'll be back up very soon.
Everybody mic's off. Is everybody's mic off?
Yeah, everybody needs to mute. I've already heard that too.
So
We're on. Hi, this is Jeff Lux again. I'll be very brief, but we're going to, apparently, because of our technological difficulties, and we apologize again for that, Channel 18 is not working well. It's on and off. The streaming is working well, so those of you who are hearing this, hopefully you're streaming. We're going to keep rolling along. We did not get the opportunity to get the full breadth of the chief's statement, and so we're going to need to do that one more time, because it's very important. So I'm gonna impose on the chief. He's gonna have to kind of do it again. So.
Thanks, Jeff. And I've taken my mask off, so please don't take that as any disrespect for our COVID, but I think it's important for you to see my face and hear my words through this. I'm going to read this prepared statement one more time, and it's critical that we get this right. The words we use are always significant. It is without debate that my words have angered some of our community and some of our town staff. Although my intentions have always been for the good of this community, and I want nothing more than open, healthy dialogue between community members and the town. My words have distracted from that process, being productive and efficient as it could have been. I'm humbly apologetic for the words I wrote and for creating that unintended diversion. Although my intent in the email was to prepare and educate our staff who had safety concerns from arriving at work on Monday morning, my comments strayed into a national political debate. I should have not allowed my comments to address national politics, and I will ensure that doesn't happen again. The chief of police or the email that I sent this last Monday should not be the conversation moving forward. This should be about racial and economic inequalities, particularly in Truckee, and how we continue to enhance our community. I want nothing more than to be able to do that together, and I hope that my words allow us to do that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chief. I really appreciate you being willing to do that twice. Again, apologize for the technical difficulties. We're gonna go ahead and push forward. If the television Channel 18 is not working, again, apologize for that. We're going to go ahead and we'll be on the streaming, and we're going to keep moving along. So the way we're going to do this now is we're going to start with the written comments, and because we got so many, we're going to be summarizing them, and then there'll be some specific questions that'll go to our panel members, and we will continue through many of these, and then we'll go to our recorded phone call comments second. Devery is sitting to my right, and she will be the one kind of summarizing some of the key points of these comments, and then I will direct specific questions if there are some, or I will simply move into the next comment. Devery, why don't you start?
Thanks, Jeff. So we're going to go ahead, and we had over a dozen comments come in regards to the 8 Can't Wait. So I'd like to describe that Campaign Zero's project is called 8 Can't Wait, whose goal is to reduce police violence by creating policies that restrict the use of force by police. I would like all the listeners that are not familiar of these 8 policies to be aware, so I will read these off for you. Ban chokeholds and strangleholds, require de-escalation, require warning before shooting, requires officers to exhaust all alternatives before shooting, duty to intervene, ban shooting at moving vehicles, require use of force continuum, require comprehensive reporting. We also had a suggestion in here for training for mindfulness and racial equality training, and there was a suggestion of a facilitator for that training.
Thanks, Dev. And as Dev said, there were a number of comments, a dozen or so, on the same topic, all fairly similar with some nuances. So what I'm going to do is turn that one to our Chief of Police, Rob Leftwich. He knows a good bit about the 8 Can't Wait policies and how we have looked at those over the years and where we are in that context.
Thanks, Jeff. So I think at a review of the 8 Can't Wait, the vast majority of those policies are already in place with the Truckee Police Department and have been for several years, if not almost a decade. There's some nuances to that, and one of the ones that jumps out at me when I read through the document is chokeholds and strangulations have never been allowed. We don't have a tactic that is referred to as a chokehold or a strangulation. We do have a carotid restraint. And in recent years, at least in the last 10 years, that has moved farther and farther up that kind of what's referred to here as a continuum of force, up towards the top where it's almost deadly force. And I think that that's going to be an important conversation moving forward with our community, this mask is going to drive me crazy as I keep on breathing in. I think that that's going to be an important conversation as we continue to move forward, because I think ultimately we need to reevaluate how important the carotid restraint is to our tactics and really assessing whether that's even a tactic that's needed moving forward. Several of the reporting requirements are already in place. Those were Senate bills and Assembly bills in 2019 that really firmed that up for the state of California. I'm not sure where other states exist. Go ahead, Jeff.
I apologize. The texts are coming in. We're getting our instant critique here via text. Apparently, the camera is still on Devery, and not on our chief. And our chief's trying to answer the question. I wonder if our camera crew can switch over to the camera to get on the chief, please. Okay. It's the TV delay. And again, I apologize for jumping in.
I'm concerned there's anybody who wants to see my face ever on television, but okay. So several of the 8 can't wait, particularly in Truckee, have been instituted for a while, and around shooting and moving vehicles and making sure that our use of force continuum is up to date. And I will also, for those that are obviously the growing momentum around this initiative, the continuum itself is even kind of an antiquated word. We no longer work off a continuum. We work off almost a circle or a wheel of use of force where all those options come in and out. So there are a lot of nuances that we need to still continue to communicate to our community and discuss with our community. But rest assured, 95%, if not more, of the 8 can't wait already in place in Truckee.
Thanks, Chief. All right, the next set of comments then that Devery will read, or summarize, excuse me.
Again, we had over a dozen, 15 to be exact. All of these comments were received in regards to the chief's email to staff. Many of these comments are harsh, but however, we were allowed to pull some questions out of this to create a good dialogue. I'm going to take this time to summarize, or not to summarize, I'm going to read a few of these comments and then pass it off to you for questions, Jeff. Good afternoon, Chief. Along with many others in our community, I was unsettled by the emails that were sent to town staff last week in regards to what appeared to be a lack of sensitivity and awareness to the larger issues around systematic racism we are dealing with as a country. I hold our local police officers in the highest regard, and I respect you as a leader, and I have found you to be collaborative and sensible coworker when addressing community issues. I would have expected a proactive response more along the lines of listening to what protesters have to say and what lessons can be learned rather than the reactive response we received. This town hall meeting is a good start and has been a better first step. My concern is that Chief Leftwich does not see what's wrong with the tactics used in Mr. Floyd's case and so many others when officers restrict the breathing of people who are in their custody and are alleged to have committed a crime. I am writing to express my extreme disappointment and anger over the recent email from our police chief. After reading the Sierra Sun article several times and trying to focus on the controversial concluding comments in the internal town communication, I remain unclear as to if the police chief's overt and covert intentions in his phrasing. I would like to hear a definitive statement on true feelings on the subject. I do not want to rush to judgment, but remain unconvinced about the later interpretation of his concluding statements. I am absolutely appalled by the emails that the Chief Leftwich sent out to the town of Truckee employees that were made public by the Sierra Sun article. Up until this point, I had the utmost respect for Truckee police. I am quite frankly horrified by the recent comments on the Black Lives Matter protests. You are an agent of the state responsible for public safety and a public representative of the citizens of Truckee.
Thank you, Deb. And as Dev indicated, there are many more comments along a similar line, ranging from, I would call them very harsh comments, which is not necessarily bad. We have to hear that, to comments that call for certain things to happen and certain solutions, sort of running the gamut. What I'd like to do is to pose a couple of questions. It's very difficult for us to respond directly to a comment that is obviously an opinion, an appropriate opinion from a citizen. But embedded in many of these comments were questions for how to look to the future, find solutions, and see if there are, in fact, these type of problems and weed them out. And I'm going to try to glean a question or two out of a couple of these dozen or so emails. I'll just have to read this one. Can we as a town and you as a police department, and I'll direct the question in just a moment, can we as a town and you as a police department agree that despite a lack of diversity amongst our permanent population, we are still in a great position of opportunity to take a comprehensive look at our policing practices and all other town functions for that matter and see what can be improved upon with respect to preventing the furtherance of racial discrimination, whether conscious or not? And assuming we can agree on that, what are some of the first steps we might take? And this one is in particular directed at the police chief. And so I'll make a first directed toward the police chief. If you have any ideas for some initial steps that might be appropriate, and then I perhaps may shift that over to Mayor Pallavi if he's interested in giving us any more information.
I think from my perspective, one of the first things that needs to take place is an honest assessment of our practices and the statistics that we gather with regards to interacting with our populations of color. So although data only tells part of the story, and that's the arrests or the stops or the citations, I think some of the pain that might be felt in Truckee and what I'm most concerned about is the interactions and just the caring for some of our populations of color in Truckee. And so I think to a certain degree, we need to reverse engineer this. I think it's presumptuous for a white male police chief to assume what our Black, African American, Indigenous, or people of color might think about their interactions with police. So in my mind, the first step is exactly what we're doing, which is a town hall, and then moving on from here to very targeted town halls that are specific to those populations of color so we can listen long before we start trying to analyze our own data.
Thanks, Chief. A second part of the question is a question to the mayor, and it's a very difficult one to answer, and perhaps he may have already answered it in his statement, but I'll give another opportunity here. The question is, as town council, in this case, we don't have the full town council, but the mayor, are we okay with our police chief holding these opinions and demonstrating systemic racism? And I think, Mayor Pallavi, you've addressed that in part, but if you'd like to add any comments, this would be an appropriate time.
Yeah, and I think, first and foremost, I should be clear. I'm up here representing council, but certainly speaking for myself, and I think that's important to note, as council as a whole has not deliberated nor discussed any of these, anything over the past week that has occurred. I did very clearly state that, from my perspective, some of the content was unacceptable and inappropriate. With all of that said, I think there is opportunity to learn, as I try to do in everything. I think there's an opportunity to grow. I try not to condemn for speaking a way that they want to, but I think it's also important to recognize that we have to be able to move forward, and it's going to be up to the chief, it's going to be up to all of our staff, it's going to be also up to our community to make sure that we recognize that people of color, the Black, Indigenous groups are listened to as best as we can, and I'm right up here with him. I'm also a white male, and I'm here to say that it's important to listen, and we have to listen, and we have to learn, and we have to grow. And back to that first question, Chief talked very much internally about how we do that, and I think externally we need to do that as well. We talk so much about tourism and infrastructure and so many of the other things that we do here in town, and I think it's important for us to recognize that in everything that we do, we could probably listen even more effectively, and I think that's what we can look forward to.
Thank you. Dave. This one is a very specific question, but I think a very important one because a lot of people get their information in this manner. The question is, why did you, and it's addressed directly to the chief, send out 3 Nixle alerts about our peaceful demonstration Tuesday evening saying you had heard there might be violence, but not one Nixle alert about how amazing the action turned out? It seems you are the one with the agenda. And I want to, before the chief answers that, I'm giving him a moment to think about it, I want to impress upon the audience who's listening that many of these questions and comments have either literally come in very recently or recently been processed. I have a feeling the chief has not heard this question or all these other questions that I'm kind of throwing at our panel. So I'm going to apologize for the surprises here, folks, but it's just the world we're in because we move this thing so quickly. So Chief, give us a little bit about the Nixle logic and the strategy there.
So I've not heard that question, but I do know the answer. We use a Nixle system as well as most of Northern California, if not California police agencies. And going into Tuesday evening, that system became completely compacted with every police department trying to send out a message, as most cities across California and probably the nation were still having protests or riots. And so when we had sent that message, we were receiving a tremendous amount of information from our community, very concerned that that vigil or demonstration was going to turn into a riot, and kind of the urban folklore of some of the different information they were receiving just through talk among the town. So we became concerned that people were going to have an unrealistic idea of what that demonstration was going to become, and we were trying to calm nerves, so we crafted a message indicating that we were receiving that information. We'd followed up on that as intelligence, and we did not believe that there was any threat or any reason to believe that that vigil wasn't going to be just that. So the entirety of the message, which was published after the fact, was really what we were trying to communicate. It was just very unfortunate that the Nixle system cut off that messaging in the text format, and also faulted and sent it 3 times when the message was only sent once. So it was a technical error. It was by no means an agenda of mine to drive some kind of fear or prevent people from contributing or participating in that vigil. And that really just turned down to be an issue with the Nixle system. And I caught a second part of that, but if you could repeat the second part of that question for me beyond the message.
I think that was the general gist of it. I think you got it. Thanks, Chief. So we're going to move on. There are many more comments within this one set of issues. We're going to move on to the next because we have lots and lots of things to go through. We want to also get to some of the commenters coming in on the phone. I'm going to look to Dev. There were very highly varied opinions expressed about the chief's email, and Dev's got several other ones to read.
The next category is, for lack of better terms, of emails that came in with a consistent overall message to us was the support for our department, and I just want to take the time to read a couple of those for us now. I wanted to send a quick note to thank you for doing a great job in a difficult time. My family and I are grateful for the fact that we feel that the Truckee Police Department truly understands the concept of protect and serve. We appreciate all the men and women of the police force that serve our community. We know it's not the police as a whole that are responsible for the firestorm we are in, but unaccountable politicians. I am disgusted by the violence done on police in innocent neighborhoods. I just want to say thank you to you and the rest of the force. We are long-term locals of Truckee and have watched the force grow since it started. No police force is perfect, and there have been a few officers that were not good for the community, but the officers as a whole are great, and we are pleased to have you as a chief.
Thanks, Dev. And again, we're not offering these comments by any way of defense or saying anything particular. These are just the comments that came in, nothing more. I don't believe there's a question in there. I think we just listen to those comments and say thank you very much. So now moving on to the next set of comments, and I'll look back to Dev, and she'll give us the gist of another summary set of comments.
This next set of comments deals with the town and the police department's policies around racism. And there's an email that expresses that there is white supremacy within the police force among officers towards community members.
There are a series of specific questions in this this series of emails, and there's at least a dozen of them, so we're not going to go into that dozen. But what I would, I think, like to do is to pose a kind of a question, and I may look to the chief on this one, and I may also look to our HR representative, Bonnie Thompson-Harden, and that really has to do with the kinds of, first, policies the town has in general, and perhaps maybe Bonnie can answer that one, with respect to cultural awareness, racism awareness, and our approach to that, both in terms of training and policy, and then specifically to the police, because the police actually receive additional and different kind of training than many of the rest of us do, and I'd like Chief to perhaps add on if he's got some add on there. Bonnie, do you want to start?
Certainly. So I can speak to what every town employee, the training that they receive. So upon hire, every town employee, we have a robust personnel policy that has an anti-harassment, anti-discrimination, and anti-retaliation policy. And we take this very seriously. It is a zero tolerance policy, and every employee is walked through this policy on their first day. And in addition, we have we follow the state mandated trainings. So every employee is trained, has 2 hours of training upon hire, and then moving forward, they maintain a regular training schedule every 2 years. So that's kind of the basis of our anti-harassment and discrimination policy. However, we've also expanded that in the last year. While we don't necessarily have a policy per se that speaks to inclusion as a town, we appreciate diversity and we know it makes us stronger. So at our management team meetings, we have recently started having much more involved conversations about how we become better allies, how we foster inclusivity in our workplace. And that also culminated in some unconscious bias training that our management team, which included our department heads as well as our managers and supervisors in all town departments, including the police department, were party to this November. So we have started this conversation. We are continuing this, and I hope this dialogue we're having today will continue to broaden the types of trainings that we offer for all of our town employees.
Thanks, Bonnie. Chief, do you want to add anything about specific to police department or not? It's up to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just expand on that a little more. I think there's 3 layers, right? You have certainly federal and state laws that mandate how we act and the type of records that we keep. We have the town personnel rules, which is an overarching guiding document. And then we have our own personnel rules within the police department. And all of those point to very similar characteristics when it comes to anti-harassment and discrimination. The one thing that's not talked about in those policies, though, is the culture that's created within a police department and our actions that we take. And although that's a little bit more subjective and difficult to articulate in a very short manner, but anti-discrimination and anti-harassment has been part of our culture, going so far beyond what the policies dictate. So to really try and encapsulate and understand all the variables, conversations, debriefings, mechanisms, policies, trainings that we have in place within law enforcement, particularly California contemporary law enforcement, would take pages to explain. So I don't want the public or the community to feel it's one policy section. It's literally a thread in almost everything that we do within our agency.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one other question from this series, this set of communications, because it's a little more specific to Truckee. What does the Community House, Sierra Community House, and other organizations that represent or work closely with the Spanish-speaking community have to say about the relationship between the police force, the town, and our Spanish-speaking and immigrant populations? And I'm also going to direct that one to you, Chief. You're on the hot seat here quite a bit.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. I don't consider it a hot seat at all. This is my job to be transparent and explain these things to our community. I've sat on the board of directors for the Tahoe Safe Alliance, which is now known as the Sierra Community House. I'm very familiar with the executive director and the staff at the Family Resource Center, which is a component of that. I think with the Latino community in particular, we have to be very cautious about the strategies that we put into place to reach out to them. I think there's a lot of distrust just culturally between the Latino community and law enforcement, and it's really critical to use community leaders for that outreach. Luckily, we have those community leaders as partners within the police department, as well as we have officers that have grown up in Truckee and grown up in the Latino community. So moving forward, we're going to be very cautious and circumspect when we put together our strategy for reaching out to any population of color, but particularly Latino, and trying to drive as much interaction as we can. Our experience has been that they're hesitant to participate, and obviously we want very robust participation so we can ensure that we're getting a broad cross-section of opinions and information that helps us better form how we police our community.
Great, thanks, Chief. Okay, I'm going to look back to Dev for the next set of topics. We're kind of topic clusters, I guess, is kind of what we're doing.
This next set focuses on how the police can make people of color feel more safe, and that's actually directed really towards the police chief and to the mayor, as well as the police budget.
Okay, there's a couple of different questions there, and I think for a couple of different of our respondents. So I'll direct the first one perhaps to the mayor, just to give the chief a chance to breathe. But that first question has to do with, how can both the police chief, the police department, and then also the mayor, the council, and I assume all town leadership make this a safer, make people of color feel welcome and safe in this community.
Sure, I'm happy to take that. Thanks, Jeff. So I think that we've been starting down this road, and it's been a very brief start. But I think first and foremost, working within the language that we're trying to work within. So translation, all materials bilingual as much as possible. So making it comfortable for people to understand in their native language what the communication tools are and how to go about doing that. I also think it's important for us not just to hold our normal forums, whether they've been virtual lately or in person, but to make sure that we're actually going out and listening in the places that all of those folks feel comfortable, that all people of color feel comfortable. So whether that's our religious organizations, community centers, other gathering places inside or out, I think it's important to be on safe ground, safe turf, where everybody feels safe, and not force interaction on places that are so formal or inherently or just inherently intimidating sometimes, like town hall can be sometimes. So I know I always used to get nervous when I wasn't up on the dais coming to make just a public comment sometimes, and I think that's just looking at some simple steps is a great first step, and then as we hone in on those strategies, really taking them to the next level and understanding how to really interact to listen even more effectively, I think, is the first step that I can see us taking for sure.
Chief, I'm gonna hold back on your comments. You may be able to weave it into another one, but I think we want to keep moving. It's a good answer, and I think I'm just time concerned here because we do have some people calling in and we want to get to those. So hang on to that thought. I will just say, taking off my moderator hat for a moment, we're actually translating this one into Spanish, so this meeting itself will be available. It'll take us a little time to get that done, and we do that very often now with some of our planning meetings, which are some of our forward-facing community meetings. So Dev, I'm putting it back to you for the next issue.
This next comment is asking about the PD and social profiling, and specifically if we have any de-escalation training.
Okay, and before I ask that question, I want to say one thing. It feels like we said this was a listening session, and all you're hearing is from town staff and town decision makers. But what we're doing is we're summarizing literally hundreds of comments that have been coming in. So it feels like Dev and I are talking, but we're trying at least to give community sentiment. So the question there has to do with, first, the question, does Truckee Police Department do social profiling? That's obviously to the chief. And do we do de-escalation training? I believe the answer to those are, well, I'll let the chief answer.
With regards to social profiling, I'm not sure the context in which they're asking that question. We do not profile our community based on their skin color or ethnicity. So we do collect data regarding ethnicity with those that we do contact. That's a requirement, and we have pretty robust systems in place to be able to break down those percentages, but we don't outwardly contact people of color just based on some kind of old definition of profiling. With regards to de-escalation training, I answered this with in a very similar way with regards to our policies regarding prejudicial treatment. They're almost weaved into everything that we do. 100% of our officers are crisis intervention trained. That's a formal training seminar, although at first blush that might not seem that that has to do with ethnicity, but it does address cultural differences and how to de-escalate certain situations with those that are in crisis, regardless of their ethnicity or cultural orientation. So that's a good foundation. When I look at actual de-escalation training, it's worked into several critical components, particularly our use of force. We have de-escalation training worked into our firearms training, our defensive tactics, which is what we call our hand-to-hand training. And then more importantly, it's been a foundation of why we reach out to the community in the way we do and through our social media channels and our communication channels. And the reason is that it's no time to build a relationship with the community in crisis. We're seeing that right now. This isn't a time for me to try and gain credibility with our community. We should have been doing that all along through our communication tactics. So we've done everything we can over the last 5 or 6 years to really build that relationship and make sure that officers, the command staff are known by the community and we know the community. The basic premise there is that if we show up at a particular highly volatile incident and those two individuals are known to each other, or there's been a strong communication that the organization has certain philosophies of enforcement, that starts that interaction off on the right foot and certainly helps de-escalate the situation when two people are known to each other. It's just human nature. The last thing I'll offer is we were one of the first agencies in the state of California to have all our field staff wear on-officer cameras. And that's not trying to catch the officers doing something wrong. That's catching them doing something right. It's just as validating for them as it is for the community to know that that entire interaction is being video and audio recorded and can certainly be looked at by a neutral party after the fact. So in my opinion, all those are a form of de-escalation.
Thanks, Chief. Dev, you're back up.
These next couple of statements are in regards to how the police department and the town build relationships with our Latino community, as well as if we collaborate with social workers in the community.
Thanks. I think the chief has answered, and the mayor also as well, the building bridges with the Latino community. This would be an opportunity to perhaps say a little bit more if you choose. But how does the police force reflect the community's ethnicity ratios? I think that's probably one. And I don't know, Bonnie, if you have those, we don't need specific stats, but I mean just kind of in general terms, or if that's a chief question.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take that because I do know what the composite is. So first off, we do a lot of things. All of our communications that go out through social media, at least the vast majority, are transcribed into Spanish, which is obviously a predominant language for our community of color. So we try and make sure that we do everything we can to keep them included within the communications and the philosophies of the police department. One of the main things that I look back on where I built a lot of relationships in that community was when President Trump was elected to office. There was a overwhelming concern regarding immigration laws, and we started a task force of community leaders to discuss that and really try and encourage our community to not be fearful of the police, particularly when reporting themselves as victims of crimes. That was a huge concern of ours, and some of the relationships that we developed through that process have carried over. As I mentioned before, I sat on the board of directors for Tahoe Safe, which is now the Sierra Community House. We've had other staff sit on the board of directors for the Family Resource Center and other government services that were well known in the Latino community. I think we need to do a better job. I think we need to reach faith-based organizations, and we also need to bring ourselves to the Latino community. As Mayor Pallavi was saying earlier, I think that this is an intimidating forum. Just the fact that we're up behind a dais is intimidating to all of us. So we need to do a much better job at finding what type of dynamics, what type of neighborhood settings, and what type of forums where we can use those community leaders to really reach out in a broader sense.
And I think there was a second piece of that question that had to do just, I think, very quickly, the kind of the how does the police force reflect the community in terms of percentage of white, percentage of Latino, percentage of African American, percentage of other?
Sure.
Just in broad strokes.
Yeah, we could do a much better job. So we do not represent the exact percentages of our community at this point. We're predominantly white. We do have Latino officers on our staff, but that's something that's really challenged by hiring practices and finding people that are viable candidates, as well as the socioeconomic standards of our area are very challenging for almost all police officers. So that's something that we need to continue to address, and where that's addressed is in the marketing. The testing process is not the time to fill that out. By no means am I ever going to allow our standards to drop to take applicants that I don't think are going to be the best police officers for Truckee. But on the front end, we do need to do a better job at marketing ourselves in those areas where we know we have Latinos interested in becoming law enforcement officers.
I think Mayor Pallavi has a, no. Oh, Bonnie does, sorry.
If I may, we also are very committed to being an equal opportunity employer. We have multiple steps, checks and balances in our employment practices, in the hiring process to ensure that qualified applicants have an equal opportunity to get to that interview table. So that's a town-wide policy and something we're very committed to. But as the chief said, we could do better, and we can continue to do that and make that a priority.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to go back to Dev, but I'm going to make another comment to our viewing public. We're going to go through a number of comments, some of which are we're just going to listen. We've been doing a lot of responding, and I'm a little concerned about time. The answers are great. I'm not, no criticism here, but we may just go through a few of these and just do some good listening. So Dev, go ahead next.
These next emails that came through are in regards to our budget. So we had budget questions coming from asking our opinion on defunding the police, and then also all the way to the other end of the spectrum of why our budget for the police increased by 15%.
Over what time period is that?
Of one fiscal year, for budget increase one fiscal year.
Okay. So that one, this one is a question. So I'll direct this, hopefully a quick answer. You know, what were some of the reasons for some annual budget increase? And the question of defunding police, I'm not sure we'll address that one. I think we'll just leave that one as a question. But Chief, maybe give us just a sense of the budget's gone up. What's happening there?
Yeah, so really quickly, we have not added necessarily extra staffing. The reason that those costs are going up is very likely to the healthcare costs and the retirement costs through California state PERS. Those are ever increasing as they're reflective of the marketplace and some of the expenses that are put on the town for those retirement costs. So if they've seen that increase, my guess the vast majority of that would be related to healthcare and retirement costs.
Thanks, Chief. And that's true actually across town budget. We've had some significant retirement increases, totally different issue than tonight. I'm simply going to read these questions. I believe the Chief has answered at least in part, and I think we don't need an answer, but I think they're just important questions in the way they're phrased. Why not require that police departments and sheriff's offices have new hire quotas based on local demographics to ensure the police force reflects the constituents they serve? I believe the Chief answered that specifically about the challenges, but around the world where the protests are loudest, you see lines of Caucasian police officers confronting crowds of diverse racial backgrounds. How can anyone start a meaningful discussion when the two sides are so undeniably different? So I'm not looking for an answer there. I just think that's a very thought-provoking question. I think Bonnie spoke to it a little bit as well, but it's something we really need to think about. Dev, you got any other ones?
No, now we're actually can go back to our live that came in as we were recording this.
Okay, what I'm going to suggest is we do a couple of those live, and then we take a bit of a break, about a 5-minute break, but let's do a couple live ones and see.
There's 3 voicemails.
Okay, let's do the three, and then we'll take a bit of a break and see where we are. I'm going to need a little bit of help here from my group. If people don't know the number, can we, Dave, you may have it memorized from previous, do we have the number that people can call in on? Perhaps that hasn't been publicized as widely in this one as it is when we do a council meeting?
Jeff, I have that. Would you like me to go ahead and say it? 530-428-6555.
Say it again, slowly.
530-428-6555.
Thanks, Devin. So I just want to give everyone a chance. I'm going to say it one more time. I know this sounds like an infomercial. It isn't meant to be. I apologize. But perhaps because we wanted to put this together very quickly to get this issue out in front, that's we didn't perhaps advertise this number, 530-428-6555. And please call. It gets recorded, and then we will play that recording. And then we're going to try the first one right now.
Brendan Riley, Truckee resident, for the policing forum this evening. These are powerful and painful times to be an American, with centuries of systemic racism and injustice boiling over in the streets. We know that by studying history, we can learn how not to repeat it. Today is a time for action. When it comes to Truckee's policing and considering the BLM movement, ongoing protests, and Chief Leftwich's recent comments, I would like to remind us of some of Truckee's past. The 601, a vigilance committee that countered lawlessness through extrajudicial lynchings, beatings, tarring, feathering, especially of undesirables, Chinese, and other ethnic racial minorities. The name 601 was part of their campaign of terror and intimidation, 6 feet under, 0 trial, 1 bullet or rope. Many of you have read the 601 plaque in Commercial Row, perhaps with some mixed feelings. Few of us have found the other plaque relating to the 601. It's more difficult to find, hidden in some boulders in the Rite Aid parking lot. These are the hooligan rocks where the 601 would administer their version of mountain justice. If the rocks you see today appear unnatural, it is because hooligan rocks were blasted with dynamite under the leadership of Constable Jacob Teeter in an effort to end the vigilantism of the 601 and destroy the symbolism of 601 terror. The screams of mercy mentioned in that plaque would no longer echo through the pines. Determinations of guilt or innocence would be done in a court, subject to appeal and due process. The 601 was over. I was proud to participate in last Tuesday's vigil, calling for justice and for change. I was proud to see Chief Leftwich walking through in uniform. I told him that I appreciated him coming out. I had no idea about his email and what opinions lurked within. Chief Leftwich's comments showed that his opinion of justice and policing is out of step with Truckee's values in these times. George Floyd was lynched by an officer responding to a counterfeit bill call. The 2 autopsies both concluded that Mr. Floyd died of homicide. Homicide is why his heart stopped beating. 1 police officer has been charged with second-degree murder, 3 others with aiding and abetting. For Chief Leftwich to claim that, quote, he did not die because of a knee on his neck, quote, is an affront to common sense. Does he really think that Mr. Floyd simply passed away from a bad heart? In not sharing that his death was ruled a homicide, what did Chief Leftwich hope to achieve? Protect his fellow men in uniforms? Distract us from the truth? The chief states that Mr. Floyd was, quote, not innocent. This comment is highly troubling. I would expect that a police chief knows we are all innocent until proven guilty in court. What is his motivation in sharing that comment? Does our chief determine guilt or innocence? Does the chief equate himself to a judge or jury? Does he think it's okay for a policeman to act as executioner? That type of 601 logic is shared by Floyd's murderer, Ahmaud Arbery's murderer, and too many others. By arguing that worldwide protests should be devalued because a small minority resorts to violence, or because the murder of Patrick Underwood is not making the same headlines, betrays the substance of Chief Leftwich's worldview. These protests don't matter to him. George Floyd's murder shouldn't be the big deal it has become. He was not innocent. He didn't die from a knee on his...
Okay. Thank you very much, Brandon. We did not cut that off. We cut it off because we're trying to stick to the 3 minutes. We appreciate those comments. They were excellent. Interesting historical perspective. I don't think there's a question in there. I believe we've done our best to address in broad strokes the email of the chief, so I'm not going to ask a question of our panel, but I appreciate very much the comment, and I'm going to look to Dev to do the next one.
This is a public comment for tonight's town hall meeting regarding police use of force. My question's for the mayor and vice mayor. Why are our elected leaders in this town bringing in issues that don't have any application to our town and what's going on with our police force. Are we more dedicated to causing issues in the community as opposed to solving the ones that we actually have? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to address that question to our panel in just a moment. I'll probably start with Mayor Polivy. But before I do that, I wanted to mention, and thank you, Judy, for reminding me, Brendan's comment, which we cut him off at 3 minutes, which we have to do in order to keep this going and give everybody a shot. The entire text of his comment is available on
The town's website?
the town's website and is available right now.
Yep.
Okay, well, thank you. And so for those who want to hear the rest of Brendan's comment, it is available right now in text form on the website. This little technology, which is kind of cool, allows us to, the call comes in and we can convert to text. So I'll bring this one back to the most recent, the second question, second commenter. And this one I'm gonna shoot toward Mayor Polivy. Why are our elected leaders bringing in issues that are not particularly germane to Truckee? And I think I interpret that to mean that issues of the kind of things happening in Minneapolis and around the world. We had a very peaceful situation. Why are we bringing this in? I believe that was the nature of the comment, if I understood it.
If that's the nature of the question and that's the issue the caller was specifically referring to, I don't, this isn't a council meeting and this isn't an agenda. This isn't an agenda item at a council meeting. This is an opportunity to listen. And as an elected leader, I truly believe deep down that my job is to listen, and it's to listen to issues, whether one person thinks it's important or 100 people think it's important or 10,000 people think it's important. And in this case, quite a few people thought it was important that we, at the very least, have this conversation, and almost 1,000 people thought it was important to take to our streets last Tuesday, and I applaud those people because they're bringing awareness of issues that aren't necessarily front and center to us on a daily basis. So we're bringing this forward because people asked us to, and that's really what our job is at the end of the day.
Thanks.
Can I add quickly too,
Yes,
Jeff?
please.
Yeah, thank you. Just very, very briefly. The other thing, and I've obviously over the last week discussed this topic, my email, the broader sense, the vigil with a multitude of people in a very large cross-section of our community. And I think one of the things that we all need to understand is this community is very supportive of our police department. And while the general consensus is we don't have police brutality here, this national dialogue that's going on is not just about police brutality. It is about social injustices. It's about racial equality, or inequality for that matter. And I think that that's an important thing for every community to be discussing. So although there might be this sense to defend the police department, which based on all the hard work of the police officers is absolutely warranted, we can't lose sight of what's a substantial part of the other elements of the conversation. And that's why we're really moving forward with this topic.
Thanks. Okay, Dev, next one.
Hi there, my name is Madison Ordway. I am responding to the mention of the 8 Can't Wait campaign in today's meeting. I am very glad that our police chief was able to explain that these reforms have already been instituted in the town for a long time, which brings up a larger issue. Reforms don't work. We've been taught this time and time again. The Minneapolis Police Department implemented at least half of these reforms, and George Floyd was still murdered. San Francisco adopted every single one of the policies and still received an F in their police scorecard. Herein lies the issue. Police violence does not match neatly into statistics in the way that the Campaign Zero puts forth these 8 demands. History has shown that ending police violence through more training or regulations does not work. The police system is inherently racist as an institution that grew directly out of slave patrol. In my opinion, the best way to change the police is to dismantle the institution. That sounds scary at first, but we can use our imaginations to consider what would go in its place, and it becomes a project that allows us to create a society that we want to live in and that we all feel safe living in. We can redirect resources into community-based initiatives that help local grassroots groups that have been doing work in those areas for so long and who know and have been engaging with their own communities meaningfully. Affordable housing, healthcare, and employment are all public safety issues. Instead of punitive or criminalization, restorative and supportive community measures can address these issues. I urge the town to consider what we ask the police to do and what could be better done by counselors, after-school programs, trauma services, and anti-violence programs. I've been involved in racial justice for as long as I can remember, and am committed specifically to criminal justice in my professional career. I offer myself as a resource to the town as someone with fluency in the language of criminal justice reform and community organizing. I hope we can move forward together with less police. Thank you.
Thank you for the comments, Madison, and your thoughts about alternatives to the way we typically think. I'll take off my facilitator hat for just half a moment. Affordable housing, which you mentioned, workforce housing. We spend, it is #1 priority for our council. We spend a tremendous amount of time, energy, and dollars on that, as well as things like equitable transit and some public services. So very much appreciate how those are, in fact, exactly the kinds of things that help some of the questions you ask. I don't think there's a question in there unless any of the panelists wish to address it. I'm not sure.
This won't shock you, but of course I have something I want to say about it. Okay. The one thing I really appreciate Madison's comments about reform not necessarily being the best path forward. I think she's absolutely right. If she was here, I think she and I would probably smirk and agree that I don't necessarily support defunding police departments and abolishing my profession, but I really do think she hit on a key principle, and that is that these 8 can't wait, although they're very critical to look at and make sure that our policies are consistent with it. This comes down to culture. We have to continue to support the police culture, and there's a saying in my world that culture eats policy for lunch. You can create all the policies you want, but the culture and the communication and the caring and the empathy that police have is what's going to drive reform.
Thanks, Chief. Dev, next one.
Hi, this is Daisy Cross. I live in Truckee, and I'm just wondering, I'd like to reaffirm the question about defunding the police. I am not the original person who asked that question, but I think that you shouldn't avoid answering it. I'm wondering why it's not being answered, and if it's perhaps because you all don't understand what defund means, and how that contrasts with the concept of abolishing the police. Defunding is different, and I do think that it is something that you could address and answer that question, please.
Okay, thanks, Daisy. I'm gonna again look up to our panel. We don't have our budget expert and analyst, Kim, and others from her team talk budget, although I know this is not meant to be a technical budget question. I get that. But I'll look to see if anyone has an answer. I think the mayor's probably the most appropriate. I just think it's not a question that has certainly come up in my tenure as town manager as a priority. But Mayor, have you got some thoughts?
I think that's exactly what we're here to listen to. We're here to listen to ideas. We're here to understand what kind of options are there in front of us, and that's the best job that we can do. So I appreciate all of those commenters, and I appreciate the more information that comes through as this process evolves. And we undergo a budget process every single year. We actually delayed ours this year, but we'll be undergoing a budget process starting in August. And these are all absolutely the types of conversations that we have over and over again to figure out how to best utilize the limited resources that we have here under our umbrella. And I think we're always open to ideas, and I agree it's not, defunding doesn't mean abolishing, and I think that, there are ways to allocate to different buckets, really how we do the work that we do, and it's important for us to understand what those options are.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So I'm going to do one more. I look to Deb for one more, and then we're going to take a little bit of a break. We've been at this now for an hour and 10 minutes or so, depending on which technical difficulty break you want to acknowledge. So we'll do one more of the call-ins, and then we'll take a 5-minute break and then come back.
This is Nancy. For both the town council, town staff, as well as police chief, about the approach to relationship building with our homeless population. Thank you.
I think that's a great one for the chief. I'll let you start there. I think you can probably speak certainly for police, obviously, and I think for all of town staff. You take the lead on the homeless questions quite frequently.
So we early on, within the last couple of years, started, it's not really a task force, but it's a homeless think tank. As most people who live in Truckee know, our homeless community is transient in nature. There tend to be more here during the summer. And then, of course, we do have ones that live here year-round. The critical thing to understand in Truckee is that our numbers are so, in that they're not so catastrophic, that we can spend the time to come to know each individual person that lives in our community that's experiencing homelessness, and that's exactly what we set out to do. So we partner with a variety of faith-based organizations and government organizations to try and take services to our homeless community, and we've followed through on that every summer. We host a lot of programs at our local warming shelter, just so that we can interact with the homeless community on a non-enforcement basis and really make sure that we understand what their needs are as they try and navigate experiencing homelessness in Truckee year-round. So that's an initiative we'll continue to do. I think it's critical. It goes back to that fundamental relationship building that I talked about earlier. Oftentimes when people are on crisis, which obviously are people that are experiencing homelessness are so much more susceptible to, we need to be incredibly patient and willing to bring services to them rather than expecting them to come find services from government. That is a much easier task here, and I can sympathize with cities that have incredibly large homeless populations, but we've done so very successfully. Another thing that we're willing to do, and what we find has really spread across all spectrums, but when people are in crisis, the Truckee Police Department has very robust policies on what types of things we walk away from. And if we don't believe that there's an imminent public threat, we're more than happy to walk away from that situation and let it de-escalate itself and bring in individuals other than uniformed police officers to try and help that individual. And that's been a key component of that homeless relation.
Thanks, Chief. And thanks, Nancy, for your comment. So we're going to take a little bit of a break. Hopefully, fingers crossed, when we return, the technology will return with us, and it'll keep up. And so we're going to do 5 minutes. It is now 6:22, so 6:27. We're going to ask our panel and our staff to come back and be here, and we will continue with some more. We've got some more voice calls, and then we've got some texts. Thanks, everyone. All right, I believe we are back, and thank you very much for allowing for a break. And we're going to continue with Dev is going to tee up another some more voicemails or some calls.
Hello, this is Jenna. My comment is, in the Sierra Sun, Chief Leftwich mentioned that addressing systemic racism in Truckee is, quote, not a black issue, but it might be a Latino issue, because this is a town with few black residents. What about the 20 million annual visitors to the Tahoe Basin, many of whom are people of color? How do you think statements like this impact the perceived safety of our town for potential tourists? Is the town considering the potential negative economic impacts should we lose any percentage of tourism due to a perceived lack of safety?
Thank you, Jenna. Very interesting question. And I'm sure there's a direct answer to it, Chief. If you want to make some comments, you can. If not, we can just accept that as an interesting question we need to think about.
No, I think that this is a critical clarification, and I've gotten a lot of comments on this myself. So as with any media interview, I don't control everything that's published, and that was the case with the Sierra Sun article. I had about an hour and a half conversation with that particular reporter, and this quote came out of a section that was probably 25 minutes in length as far as an explanation. And what I did say, I want to stay away from trying to imply I intended to say something. What I did say in that interview was that I think what is needed is a custom approach to every community of color. I think that our Latino community has certain concerns and dynamics that are different than the Black and African American community, different than the Indigenous community, and it's really critical that we as a police department take the time to reach out to each individual community and understand their perspective on racial inequality and how we move forward. So unfortunately, the Sierra Sun just published it's not a black issue in Truckee, it's a Latino issue, and that's not at all what the context was of my statement. With regards to the economic impacts, I can completely understand people's concern, but for me, that's the farthest thing from my worry. I worry very much about the reputation and our ability to communicate with all people of color, and the financial impacts to me just pale in comparison to the feeling of safety that I want everybody to have when they visit Truckee.
All right, thanks. Dev, the next one.
Hello, my name is Jeff. I'm just calling. I am a summer resident of Truckee and have been for almost 17 years. I just wanted to pass along. I'm proud of you guys for having a meeting in a public forum to address these issues. My opinion is that Chief Leftwich and his entire staff have been nothing but professional for the entire time that I've been up there. How they have handled many situations that I have seen, being a summer resident, living locally, has been nothing but impressive. I live in the Bay Area. I see a completely different type of handling of those situations in the Bay Area, and I just wanted to lend my support to say that I could not be more proud of how the Truckee Police in general handles a variety of different events when I'm up in Truckee.
Thank you, Jeff. I don't think there's a panel question in there, so we'll go to the next one.
This is Megan Sanchez. I'm an educator and resident in Truckee, California. The sentiment in Chief Leftwich's email to town employees was abhorrent and at best extremely poorly worded, as was the blind defense of him by Mayor Pallaby. I agree with the sentiment of community connection being important for policing our town, but just because we are in a hugely diverse urban area doesn't mean we shouldn't be as trained and prepared as any urban area, considering our influx of diverse tourists who come from all over the world. Last week, Chief Leftwich was quoted as saying, "I've always assumed that our officers don't see color. This is extremely problematic. How can you possibly fix something that you don't believe you actually see? If you are conducting training to help individuals move past their racial biases, it's important to understand that the goal is not to be colorblind. The goal is actually to see and recognize skin color, but to control and regulate your innate impulse to make decisions based on such characteristics. Being able to first recognize this is critical. What kind of action is the police department taking to ensure that police officers, including Chief Leftwich, are being educated on their unconscious bias and are actively working on a daily basis to mitigate it, especially in their position of power.
Thank you, Megan. Appreciate the statement. I think I'm actually going to turn this one to Bonnie. There's a question there about police actions, but I think Chief Leftwich has addressed that to some degree. But I think the unconscious bias question, maybe you can just remind us, Bonnie, are we looking forward to doing some additional work there? Is that in the plan or thoughts from your department?
Yes, so we did start this conversation, and all managers did undergo some implicit bias training early in November. But I think this is an important conversation that we need to continue. It needs to be townwide, it needs to be in the police department, it needs to be within our organization. So I think this is something we will continue to seek out training and opportunity and enable our employees to have difficult conversations as well.
Thanks, Bonnie, and thanks, Megan. The next one, Deb.
Hello, my name is Nicole Baran. I'm a resident of Truckee, and I wanted to just ask if the chief could elaborate on one of the questions earlier on his answer regarding what does the department do if there is actually racism that is exhibited in the department, whether it's through jokes or known participation in any sort of white supremacy comments or groups, and if you could just elaborate on what actually happens if there is demonstrated racism by any of the police officers or staff. Thank you so much for all of your work.
Thanks, Nicole. And I think Nicole's question was pretty clearly framed, Chief. So if you could elaborate if there is some question about racism in this case.
Sure. So one of the bullet points of the 8 Can't Wait is to have a duty to intervene. And although that's not something new, we do absolutely have a duty to intervene. And when it comes to racial slurs, even unconscious bias or things that might happen in the locker room or just the culture within the police department, there's absolutely a duty to intervene. And so we have a very thorough process with internal investigations that deals with how to interview and isolate those that might have been witnesses to it. And then, of course, a very thorough disciplinary process and review. So there's never been an incident in the Truckee Police Department that I know of where that would be applied, but certainly that would be a heavily considered disciplinary action on our part.
All right, thanks, Chief. Next one, Deb.
Hello, my name is Micaiah. I'm a born and raised in Truckee resident, and I have a few questions based off what I've seen outlined in the budget for Nevada County for our region, as well as the comments that were made so far in today's town hall meeting. First, I wanted to ask Chief Leftwich's response to the idea of defunding local police. I mean, I found it very interesting that he both admitted that systems are really what need to be changed and the culture as well. I wonder what culture he's perpetuating in our local police force based off the comments that came through the email that was sent to Truckee staff last week. Are those the same perceptions that he is having everyone hold in the police?
Okay, that one seemed to get cut off a little bit there. The full text will be available. Thanks, Micaiah. I think we dealt with the question of defunding in the sense, I think both the mayor and the chief did. This is a complicated question, and I think we took care of it. Chief, I think you've spoken to a number of times this question of sort of the culture and what culture you're inculcating into your troops in this regard. Is there anything more you want to add to that, or do you feel like it's we've said what we can? Otherwise, we'll move on.
Yeah, the only thing that I'll add is I got the sense, and maybe it was miscommunicated, that I believe that there's a culture change that needs to happen in the police department. I can't support that. I frankly think we have a phenomenal group of individuals that are ultimately incredibly caring and connected to their community. And what I am referring to is substantial change within our industry across our nation has to be focused on from a cultural perspective. Policies will not drive where our industry needs to go. But as far as how we react to things and the communication and the collaboration that the Truckee police officers have had with the town of Truckee, I don't think we have a culture of racism or prejudice at all.
Okay, before Dev does the next one for us, I want to remind everyone of the phone number. We're moving on to almost 6:40. We're going to keep moving on this. We may go past 7 because of our technical difficulties. We got a bit of a late jump, but the phone number is 530-428-6555. We still have a number more, and Dev, I'll get you the next one.
Hi there. Chief, can you elaborate on your statement in the Sierra Sun that states, "I've always assumed that our see color." Thank you.
Let me read this one. She's asking if you can elaborate on the statement in the Sierra Sun that you state, "I've always assumed that you see color." That could be incorrect or fragmented, but that is how it came across in the voicemail.
I don't believe I've ever said that, and I don't know what she's referring to.
Okay, we may have either a little glitch in the way the voicemail came through. I apologize for that if that's what happened. We'll try to recover that one, but let's move on, Deb. That one didn't quite come through.
Hello, my name is Phyllis Matey, and I'm commenting on the virtual town meeting. I had sent this email in earlier, but it hadn't been read. I'm calling about Senate Bill 978 and 1421 that calls for transparency papers to be put forth about the police department. And what I wanted to know, so we could all be on the same page to really understanding what the situation is in Truckee, is in the past 3 years, if we could have additional information to find out the gender, race, or ethnicity of the complainants, the arrest, and the arrest with force, so we understand if there has been any unconscious bias happening. And also I know the Truckee budget, 20% of our Truckee budget is spent on the police budget of about $6 billion. So if we could have continuing dialogue on what is this spent for, how much is implicit bias training, how much is stress counseling for police, things like that. And I think that's it for now. So thank you very much. That's all.
Thank you, Phyllis. I'm going to take just the last one, the one about the budget, and then I'll bump the one back. I think, Chief, you mentioned something about the collecting statistics on arrests, and I'll have you reiterate that just very briefly. But in terms of the police budget, of course, we look hard at our budgets every single year. We'll be doing that in September because of COVID. We had to delay our budget 3 months this year. COVID's been a big challenge for us in a lot of ways. And I appreciate the comment, is all I will say. We're looking deep into the budget and deciding how money is allocated and what things are spent on is exactly what the council does in very extensive sessions. And I think our mayor and the council members who are observing and watching are hearing that, and we'll be diving in to do that. So, Chief, you want to just reiterate kind of the statistical basis of arrests, and I think it also said use of force, when use of force is part of that the arrest structure.
So I think that there's a lot more we could do to report on our transparency page with regards to the specific demographics for our use of force. To be quite frank, and I think she included complaints in there as well. To be quite frank, those numbers are so low that I'm not sure they're that telling, but it's certainly information that we're willing to share. She did mention a Senate bill and an Assembly bill that required us to have a transparency page. I think it's important for our community to know that that is on our webpage. That lists out any significant use of force or any kind of situations that the police department has been involved with. There's no incidents that apply to that particular Assembly bill or Senate bill. We also have a variety of have other information that we've chosen to add on there, as well as our full policy manual and our complaint process. We also issue a quarterly report, and we've often covered some of those demographics, particularly with, or I shouldn't say demographics, some of those statistics, particularly with our percentage of use of force. And in Truckee, we normally, historically speaking, over the last 5 years, our use of force is around 0.1% of those calls for service that we handle. And the vast majority of those, whether some years it's 5 and some years as much as 10 or 12, are what we call control holds, which is actual hands being on somebody. They're not substantive uses of force like batons or even taser deployments in some scenarios. So we've never shot anybody in the town of Truckee in the history of the police department, and we've never had an officer shot, thank God, and we've never had significant trauma because of a use of force. So our data speaks for itself with regards to how we do that. However, I appreciate her point that it might be time to start printing and publishing the demographics of those contacts.
I would like to add one thing. My name is Andy Morris. I'm the town attorney. After SB 1421 passed, which required police department records about various uses of force and sexual assaults and some other things to be made public, we received and responded to a pair of requests from the ACLU for all of our records that are responsive. And as the chief said, but I think it bears repeating, there weren't any. We haven't had any incidents of the type that the law contemplates, and so I was very, very happy to be able to tell the ACLU twice last year. We would love to give you the records. We would certainly give you the records if they existed, but there simply aren't any records because there haven't been any incidents. So we have been tested on that, and we responded, and I'm happy to say that we still don't have any records of those incidents because they haven't happened.
Thanks so much, Andy. Okay, Dev, got another one?
I just had one other note that I thought interesting, and although it doesn't cover all those questions, I did have staff pull up some of the statistics with regards to potential questions around racial profiling. And our stops and citations during traffic stops almost is identical to the percentage of our population. So 78% white population and 18% Hispanic, and that parallels to the citations that we issue. So it appears as though there's absolutely no correlation to any kind of racial profiling, at least in our traffic enforcement.
Thanks, Chief. Dev, you got a couple more?
Hi, my name is Emily Cashman. I noticed while watching the meeting there was no number to call in. And this is a very one-sided meeting. I want to draw attention to the fact that the town is not registering that there have been problems. And I think that that's important. I've experienced this as an activist, that it's simply swept under the carpet. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily, for your comment. I don't think there's a question there to answer, but it's important. Dev, why don't you go to the next one?
Hello, this is Reagan. Thank you for holding this town hall. In the Sierra Sun, Chief Leftwich mentioned that addressing systemic racism and racial profiling in Truckee is, quote, not a black issue, but it might be a Latino issue, because this is a town with few black residents. What about the 20 million annual visitors to the Tahoe Basin, many of whom are people of color? How do you think statements like this impacts the perceived safety of our town for potential tourists? Is the town considering the potential negative economic impacts should we lose any percentage of tourism due to a perceived lack of safety here? Thank you.
Thank you, Reagan. That question came up a little bit earlier, almost verbatim, and I think we at least addressed it a little bit. So I'm going to move now. We've got a couple of more. We have a number of texts that have come in, and some we're scrambling very quickly to see if we can and kind of see where the duplications are and make sure we don't just duplicate. But I'll look to Dev if she's ready to do a few of the texts that have come in.
My question is for the mayor and vice mayor. In a community that doesn't have a police force that engages in the type of behavior we have seen in Minneapolis, can this town hall meeting seen as anything other than an attempt by you both to stoke the flames of hate and racism in our town? A large portion of this community believes that we are trying to create problems when there are none. We support Chief and Truckee Police Department in this town.
Thank you for the comment. I think that one, the vice mayor graciously allowed the mayor to kind of be here to answer these questions, so I'll let the mayor take that one. Do you want me to repeat it, Dave? Or?
Well, I think it was, are we trying to stoke anything that didn't exist was the premise. And my answer is when 1,000 people show up in your downtown to peacefully gather and express concern, that's what we're here to talk about. That's what we're addressing. It's unfortunate. Some of Chief's comments were unfortunate. That was not meant to be the purpose of this evening. And in fact, I was waiting for this opportunity. I'd like to thank our vice mayor because this was all her idea, or this was partially her idea, at least before this all started. And I think she brought it up in order to be able to listen. And while we moved it up, we made it happen. There were other circumstances that came. This is by no means any type of negative reaction to our police department. This is not what this is about. This is about how can we do better, how can we learn from each other, and how can we learn from the dialogue that's happening at the national level.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Next one, Deb.
While I support your efforts to have a discussion with the community, I do not support the anti-law enforcement undertone to your messaging. You are continuing the derogatory tone and anti-police sentiment by using language inferring police violence and systematic racism within law enforcement. You should thank your lucky stars that have such a caring and fantastic leader in Chief L. Your lack of support for the Truckee PD is shameful, and the narrow-minded few on Truckee City Council should be ashamed of themselves and their actions. I support Truckee PD as we all in law enforcement. They have a thankless job and are not appreciated for the sacrifices they make on a daily basis to serve the community and protect its citizens. Anti-police messaging and sentiment are not the answer to resolve this world of hate right now. I'm disappointed in the lack of support for the fine officers and chief that you have.
Thank you for that comment. And Mayor, I believe you have
Let me reiterate one more time, because I did just say this and I'm going to say it again. The utmost of respect, the utmost of dedication. Everything that happens within our police department is top notch. We have never had a complaint. We have never, at least the council has never had a complaint. And it's really important for everybody to understand that this is not about anything negative. This is about how can we move forward together. This is about how can we learn. And this is really about listening. And there's zero attacks on our police department. And I want to be very clear about that. I think they do a fantastic job, and I'm proud to be a part of it. So.
Thanks, Mayor. Some more, Deb?
Hello, thank you for taking the time to listen to our questions and concerns. Police unions have used their influence to establish unfair protections for officers in their contracts with local, state, and federal government, making it difficult for police chiefs to punish officers that are unfit to serve. This raises concern. Full transparency is a must. Are members of the Truckee PD affiliated with any such union, and if so, what union?
Chief, I'm going to let you answer that, but I think just to stick to that second part at the end, the question of the union and where we are in that.
Yeah, sure. And I think it's a valid concern. And what they're referring to is the Peace Officer Bill of Rights for the state and then the bargaining group. We don't belong to a union in the town of Truckee. They have their own Peace Officers Association. However, they do have a Peace Officer Bill of Rights through the state that would be there regardless if they were a union or a POA.
Okay, thanks, Chief. Yeah, we've got some more. Number of our texts are similar to some of the calls and very similar to some of the emails. So, apologize if your particular wording doesn't get either read or heard. It will all be available. It will all be publicly available. It will be available to the council. It will be available to town leadership. But we're going to try not to duplicate where the issue or the topic is similar to one we've already covered or about to cover.
Anyone who wants to dismantle the police should have no part in this conversation.
Okay, comment. Thanks for the comment. Let's have another one.
Good evening, Town Hall. My name is Sid, and I first want to appreciate what Mayor Polavia said in his response to the question of defunding the police in the budget of 2020. I would also like to add the idea of funding the Truckee Police more than usual to increase training efficiency and deeper education into unconscious racism that could better our police who come into contact with people of all races due to their tourism. Thank you all so much for your time to this issue.
Thank you, Sid, for that suggestion. I see our mayor taking that in, where our budget conversations will be happening in September. Another one, Deb?
I am a retail business owner located in the town of Truckee. I have nothing but respect for the chief and the Truckee Police Department. I would be considered a person of color. There are no systematic racism for the Truckee in the Truckee PD. This is all virtue signaling.
Okay. Again, thank you for the comment. I think we'll just keep moving on if there's any others. We may.
Hello, I would like for my question to be considered in today's virtual town hall. What training does the police department implement to ensure that officers are capable of nonviolent forces on citizens? Will there be enhanced training soon due to the current state of affairs? If so, when and how will it entail?
Oops, I'll direct that one to the chief. Obviously, I think you've addressed the overall question of training and the different de-escalation methods and all of that. But perhaps that last, are there some plans in the works for anything additional, or kind of what's next in terms of the this sort of training for the force?
Yeah, honestly, and as I stated before, I don't have immediate plans for what kind of training is coming forward, because I'm still not convinced that I'm tapping into the right community groups to listen to what the concerns are of our community. So our training plan should be built around exactly what the feedback is that we're getting from forums like this, and I view that as the most integral part of this moving forward. So it's a reverse engineering strategy. The one thing that I didn't emphasize that I think I should is that our hiring practices have been different than a normal police department, although they follow all the peace officer standards and training requirements, but we really try and hire experienced officers with a high level of emotional maturity and that have a true desire to be in Truckee. And the element that's so critical there is that by wanting to be in Truckee, you have a natural connection to your community, and it really helps with that desire to form those community bonds and react appropriately and maintaining that emotional maturity in light of what can be very traumatic situations. So I feel, and not trying to be boastful, this is really credit to my staff more than me, that our training standards and our training expectations, as well as our hiring standards and our hiring expectations, are probably some of the finest in the state, and that allows us to continue to bring personnel here that can just naturally do this because they have those abilities.
Thank you, Chief. So we're going to take just a slight detour here to give our team, who is reading emails as they come in, reading texts as they come in, trying to evaluate whether we've kind of taken care of that one or a new idea. Give them a couple of minutes, and so I'll kind of do my own closing. Our mayor will be doing the actual closing of the meeting when we get there in a little bit. The first thing I just wanted to do is again apologize to all of you out there for some of our little technological glitches. This is the first time we've tried a meeting like this, and we did it literally very, very hurry-up fashion so that we didn't wait too long after the event itself last week and the concerns over some of the statements. So we want to do this quickly. Apologize for that technology. We're getting better at this remote stuff. I'm hoping to get back to regular meetings and no COVID one of these days. Secondly, I want to thank our panel for answering these questions and for being available and providing information, and as well as our staff. We've got a number of staff members here, both from the police department, from the town clerk and communication department, and also our translator is here, and our technical staff. So thank you very much for being able to pull this off on incredibly short notice. I'm going to kind of do my concluding remarks. They're not going to be philosophical. They're simply going to be my observations as the moderator, and then we're going to go back to Dev, who is basically looked at a series of emails and tried to pick out those that are different. And again, I'm going to suggest that we did not get to every single text and every single email. We did, I think, get to every single voice mail or voice as we know it. We got to every one of the several, I think, 100 that we received email earlier, but all of the actual information will be available and compiled. So my concluding remarks are that, you know, this is a challenging time, and there's definitely a great deal of emotion and passion around this subject, and appreciate everyone who has been listening and who's been weighing in on that score. This is just a start. We've had these kind of conversations, not specifically about this, but we've had conversations, but clearly you don't solve a problem like this. You don't even begin to find the first solution to a problem like this in a listening forum when you first begin. So I see this as a start. We'll see what our entire council has to say about these issues in subsequent meetings when we can bring it to our full town council, and also have some additional kind of staff thoughts on this in the future. What's next for us? I'm not sure. We don't have a concrete next step, but we may do another listening session. We may do something at a town council meeting. It seems very important that we bring the other 4 critical council members into this conversation as well. And thank you, Mayor, for representing that group tonight. And then finally, I'm going to conclude my remarks and give it back to Dev with just this. I am quite certain that we did not, I don't know if the word is satisfy or make comfortable those people who are very uncomfortable, and some of those emails and some of those thoughts and communications we read in the beginning. And they are indeed uncomfortable to hear, but very critical and important to hear. So I don't pretend that we're here to make people feel good and that it's all a consensus and we all agree and that we've got it all wired. That is not the case, and that's, as a moderator, that's not what I hear. But what I hear is an absolute openness to listening, an absolute openness to thinking about creative solutions, and there have been a bunch of them thrown out here, and I suspect there are going to be a bunch more over time, and I think that's kind of where we end this. So I'm going to end my comments anyway, and sorry for the editorializing. I'll go back to Dev now. She's got a couple of emails to do a summary of, and if that results in some additional questions, we'll do that, and then we'll close it with the mayor.
What areas do you feel our Truckee police need to improve upon when it comes to handling situations with a person of color, and what action will your officers take when confronted with racism? Whether that be on social media, on a post of yours, or in the streets, will you intervene? For instance, if you were to see a white person say racist comments towards a person of color?
I think that one clearly is directed to the chief. I think it was a pretty clear question.
Yeah, I have the full expectation that we'd intervene. I'm not really sure. I have a little bit of difficulty with the fact that there's this assumption there that I've made statements that are racially motivated. I don't think I've made any statements that are racially motivated, but I would like to focus more on the actions of our officers on the street or even within the confines of our police department. And I have the full expectation they should call me out on that, or anybody else that they come into contact with when that's occurring.
Thanks, Deb. You've got another one?
I do. There's a few questions within here. How many police officers are there in Truckee? What is our annual budget? What percentage of the town's budget goes towards police? How many incidents do Truckee police respond to per year? And do we need the number of police in our town?
Okay, number of officers, the total police budget, I believe it's about 20% of the total town budget, so you'll give us the actual number. And what is a typical annual number of incidents? I realize the word incident there could be interpreted many ways, from a traffic, a citation to an actual arrest. But if you can give us just a couple of stats, Chief, that'd be helpful.
Sure, 25 police officers. Number of incidents we handle every year, somewhere between the mid 15,000 all the way up to 17,000. We have a $9 million budget, but that includes the parking district as well as animal services. If you break that out, there's $6 million approximately that go to police. And although I love the fact that you've only made me 20%, but I think I'm a little bit higher than that. I think I'm in the 30s or 40% for the town budget. But we can source that out. I don't know the exact percentage. And I feel like I'm missing another component.
No, that was it. Okay. And in fact, yeah, the 20%, we have to look at the budget. It's complicated because capital projects large capital projects, if you include those, completely dwarf the operating budget. And anyway, those are kind of details we don't need to get into. Dev?
The one thing I will add that people always seem to not less of understand, but just get with our annual budget. The vast majority of our police department budget is staffing costs. And by staffing costs, I mean, obviously, employing people, their health care, their overtime, and then, of course, their retirement costs. So a lot of that is outside of my control. And I did remember as I was speaking that there was one other element in there. With our staffing numbers, we're appropriately staffed for a community of 16,000. Because we have such a wonderful community and our crime statistics are so low, that allows us to maintain the staffing that we have, when in reality, if we look at our homeowner population or the population of 32,000 in Truckee, or even our visitor population, by those numbers per capita, we'd be significantly understaffed. So we are very nimble in the way that we do that, and we have a very modest staffing level given the size of influx we have in both visitors and second homeowners.
Okay, thanks, Chief. We got another one, Deb?
I think that the real message that came out of the chief's email was that he, as well as all police and all of Truckee, needs to learn about white privilege and grow into more compassionate citizens of this world. I hope all the future training involves the subject.
Okay, I'm going to just leave that one. I think there's a good statement. I appreciate that caution and that thought. There's not a question in there for any of us. Are there some more, Dev? Or are we getting down to the... And again, recognize that there are a number of these emails that may not be read verbatim, and there are a number of these texts as well. We're trying to really deal with topics. The time is almost 7:10, 7:06, and we'll be wrapping up fairly shortly with the mayor, but we can take a few more. Any more, Deb, that you want to try?
I am wondering what, if any, thought has been given to building an alternative entity to the police department. Many cities and towns across America have already begun to discuss alternatives to their police forces in favor of a more skilled task force that is capable of de-escalating situations in which police and use of force is not needed.
So we've actually done that in 3 components in Truckee, the first of which I've already talked about lightly, which is the outreach to the working group around homeless issues. That same thing has been discussed around mental illness and making sure that mental health services are addressed in a different way so that a police officer, a uniformed police officer, does not escalate a situation in a variety of mental health crises calls. And then the last, where I think that that's true, is we've done a great amount of work to civilianize our police force. We do have community service officers, police aides, and our police department is much larger than just sworn staff. I mentioned before that we have the parking district and animal services. Animal services, of course, is something that's near and dear to all our hearts. Animals connected to the Humane Society of Truckee Tahoe, and that balances us out as an organization and creates a culture just beyond what police are thinking of.
Thanks, Chief. And actually, I'll put my town manager hat on. I will just add to the commenter, and thank you for the comment, that one of the things, Truckee, we don't do traditional social services, and that's the county. And in fact, because the county is down in Nevada City, we have a fairly limited social services capacity here. And so I think that's one of the issues as well, is that some of those things we're talking about are social service kind of things, and we struggle with that. It's not a function of the town. And I'm not stalling here, but I'm looking at Deb to see if there are any others that have come in or any voice calls. If not, it's about 7:10, I think, close to it. Okay. All right. I think we're gonna call it call it good. This was not a public hearing. There's no decision to be made. Probably thankfully for the mayor here, we're not grappling with a vote amongst us. But again, I want to thank everyone, both the individuals who are here who put this on and who graciously agreed to answer some questions and do some listening. The listening goes well beyond the group sitting in the dais that you've seen on the TV, maybe, and seen through the streaming, very much so. It goes to, I know other council members are observing, all of them. I know lots of citizens are observing, and then all of this is going to be recorded, including all of the detailed comments, which people will have access to and available. And with that, I'm going to turn it to Mayor Pallavi, and wants to kind of close up for us.
Yeah.
Excuse me, Mayor. I see the chief. You want?
It's cried away. I'm happy to acquiesce to the mayor, but I'd like to close with just a thought as well after you're done. Thank you, Mayor.
Absolutely, no problem. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate the fact that we put this together so quickly, and we had so much involvement, both internally but also externally from the community. So, I really applaud our community for taking pride, for, having opinions, for expressing those opinions. That's healthy. And we don't all have to agree all the time, and we're not going to, and that's just going to be okay. But we're going to all move this forward, and that's what really we're here to do. So we do have a lot to learn. We have a lot to reflect on. I am going to reiterate some, from my perspective, a lot of the language in some of the emails that we discussed earlier. It was unacceptable and it was inappropriate. The final two paragraphs were both, insensitive and not reflective of the town's policies, values, and I won't speak for the rest of my council members, or for mine. As we move all of this forward, I look forward to continuing this dialogue, hopefully more out in the community and not in this room, and especially as we get clear of all of the COVID-19 activities, we look forward to doing that on so many of the activities that we're going to be moving forward under, that were already initiated prior to that, and that we will continue to drive forward as we move forward. I'm just going to repeat a few lines from my opening statement, because really, I think they just best capture where we are at this time. And those were that I believe in our work here and all of our abilities to make positive change. I believe in a just and fair society for all people of color. I believe that by listening to each other, we can all learn something and progress together. So again, thank you for your participation this evening, and for everybody's braveness to tackle these challenges, for being up here, answering these questions without scripts, without prompts, and even though they promised us they were going to show them ahead of time, they didn't. So we were all working as hard as we could to really speak from the heart, and I speak from the heart and speak from the book about exactly what's happening here. So thanks for joining us, and I'd like to pass it off to Chief Leftwich.
Thank you, Mayor. So I did not prepare this closing statement, but it certainly has come to my mind as I've listened to the comments. I think there's a few things that I really need to say that might not make any difference for those that have already been very disappointed in me. The first of which is I don't believe that George Floyd had anything that happened to him. He did not deserve a single bit of it. And I don't know if I've publicly said that, but it's an atrocity. It should be condemned, and it really is a tragedy that has sparked a bigger conversation that probably was so needed in our country. The one thing that concerns me the most, this has been very difficult not only on me and my staff, and watching my staff go through this has caused a great amount of guilt for me. The emotional component to this, as hard as it is for me and my family, I really am saddened by what this has done to the reputation of the police department. And I think it's critical, and I humbly ask our community to recognize the relationship they have with their police department and everything that the men and the women of this department have done to build that community relationship, and judge them on that. I'm perfectly fine with the frustration. Well, I shouldn't say I'm perfectly fine. I'm understanding of the frustration that is directed towards me. But as that frustration starts to trickle down to my staff, I really have to remind people to judge them based independent of me, because I feel that they deserve that much. So thank you, and if you could do that for me, it would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Chief. I think those were great closing comments, and I, for one, with my town manager hat on, echo those comments. I echo our incredible support and of our exemplary police department and all of our departments. And I think, you know, this town, it's easy to criticize. It is perfection is the enemy of the good, they say. We can't be perfect, but I think we try very, very hard. And with that, I think, unless Mayor Paul, if you have anything left, anyone else in the panel, I think we are done. And I'll look to our technology folks to close us out. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a good evening. And be safe on the COVID front. That's still with us, and we'll be talking about that at the council meeting tomorrow night, amongst other topics, if you want to visit the council meeting. Thanks so much.